It's Coach Tarek, the host of the Purpose-Driven Movement. I have a great conversation with Dane Larsen, an exercise physiologist based in Brisbane and working in the Total Fusion Gym. His perspective on a multidisciplinary approach, mindset shifts, how we can really get the best out of our clients, and really ensuring that our clients are first. If you're a doctor, your patients be first. Really finding that opportunity to build know, like, and trust with your clients. There's some tremendous strategies that you will learn as a coach, really about the importance of communication and how these little tactics really matter and create beautiful meaning and synergies between you, your clients, or your patients. Tune in to this wonderful episode with Dane Larsen. Check out the Functional Training Institute's latest offer, which is 15% off of any of our online training courses. Simply go to functionaltraininginstitute.com and input PDM15 at cart checkout. Welcome to the Purpose-Driven Movement podcast, where we get high performers in the health, fitness, and wellness space, in particular getting their viewpoints on how to really incorporate movement perspectives that will help everyday people. And my guest today is Dane Larsen, and really good to have you on, Dane.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to going down the rabbit hole today.
Yeah, well, won't make it too deep. You know, we'll had a little bit of controversy. We'll mix that in with a little bit of plain sailing knowledge and also really just diving into your mindset and your perspective, which we're looking forward to listening in on. So good to have you, mate. And we'd love to really know a little bit more about you, your journey, because I think story is powerful. And I know a little bit about you. I think the audience would love that perspective of your story.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess I started in the same way that a lot of us might get into the industry, which is I was a little bit of a washed up athlete, loved my football, ended up getting injured a whole lot, which meant I spent a lot of time on physio tables, etc., doing rehabilitation, having surgeries. On top of that, my parents are both in the industry. So my mum is a hydrotherapist or an aquatic physio. My dad was an anatomy and physiology teacher. So in a way, you could say the apple didn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah, it's powerful. I giggle there because it sort of reflects a bit of my story, you know, where a failed athlete. So I always laugh at that. But I learned so many lessons. I also had a series of sustained injuries through sport, which actually taught me a lot and informed where I am today. And to that end, how did those experiences sort of inform where you're at today? And what were some of the kind of profound periods in your professional development that has elevated you to the status of what you're doing today?
I guess rehab is a really unique opportunity. And when something gets taken away from you, it's quite confronting at the start. But when you go down the health and wellness rabbit hole and you start to learn more about yourself and how your body actually operates, it's quite a powerful process. And I really enjoyed that self-discovery, not only physically, but I'm quite big on the mental side of things too, and combining that sort of holistic approach. And all of that, I've been lucky enough to kind of learn myself and then start to share that with my clients. So it's pretty funny that I almost accidentally fell down this rabbit hole, if you will, in terms of like getting into health. I never knew what I wanted to do. And through that injury basically led me to my line of work in exercise physiology.
Yeah, that's really profound. And you've shared with me that you've worked in a performance perspective as well in medical clinics. And so has that sort of helped inform how you sort of treat your well, not so much treat, but how you liaise with your clients and in the general population, for example?
100%. I've been very lucky. There's kind of the age-old concept that, you know, nothing's new under the sun. So I'm very lucky to have worked with some sensational practitioners, from surgeons, physios, osteos, from, you know, the pinnacle of sport in Australia, and really learn my craft from them, which was super helpful. It's interesting too, you know, I did 2 years of personal training, did a diploma of fitness, then went on to university and did 4 years in exercise physiology. But there's a large difference between the theory side of things and the practical. And being around those amazing minds is probably what shaped me the most in learning and developing my clinician style, if you will. And I think that's the cool part about what trainers, physios, exercise physiologists do, is it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. We all kind of have unique approaches in a way. So, you know, I can let my unique side of things kind of shine through, which works well with some people, and other people have a slightly slightly nuanced approach too. And that just makes it a really fun, collaborative sort of environment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We'll dive into that sort of collaborative mindset because I feel from my experiences over quite a number of years that there's always been this distinction and between an EP and a personal trainer. Of course, we know that they have a scope of practice in Australia. It's pretty clear and delineated. However, there's this sort of idea that had been spinning and still spins, I think, around the EP kind of not really respecting the trainer and the trainer as well thinking, well, what kind of practical resources or knowledge does the EP have? So can you dive into that a little? It seems that you've got this sort of harmony, if you like, and understanding and respect for collaborative allied health. So what would you say from your perspective is the key recipe between distinguished features of an EP versus a personal trainer?
Yep. And it's really hard with health because there are so many different professions out there and there's new ones popping up all the time. And we've all sort of got some form of lanes that we work in. For example, like as an exercise physiologist, we have some background in nutrition and other areas like sleep, but by means no expert in those fields as well. So collaboration becomes really important when we work outside of our scope. And I guess, having been a personal trainer and still I consider myself first and foremost really to be a coach, a rehab and performance coach. Nothing fancy, just doing the basics with my clients. But as a personal trainer, probably the biggest and hardest thing to deal with is when injuries come up and then knowing, what can I do? What can't I do? How do I operate? And the interesting thing when you've dealt with clients for a while is you realize that everybody's got something going on. Nobody really is general population. If you do, that's like a golden geese and that's great. But usually most people have had some lower back stuff. They might have some knee pain going on. They probably rolled their ankles a few times playing basketball or netball. So knowing how to deal with those injuries and I guess draw on experiences from other industries that might specialize in those sorts of things like physio, So for example, we lean heavily and work hand in hand with physio to deliver people back to 100% or, even further really. And I say further because if we consider when an injury happens and we assume that they were 100% when they got injured, really we've got to take them back to 120%. We've got to get them stronger than what they were before. So I think that cross collaboration becomes really important, especially when you don't understand something, being able to reach out and connect with people. So the environments that I've been lucky enough to work in, you've got a host of experience that you can just draw on because we're all just trying to, a great collaborative approach with an athlete or an individual. They've got all of these cogs in their support team and we're all trying to move forward in the same direction.
Yeah, and I think underlying this, and anyways, from my perspective is, really fear of losing a client or fear of having to collaborate but maybe that perspective or a number of others. It could be that. So that these sort of demything, if you like, these nuanced, maybe at the back of the mind of a trainer, for example, personal trainer, being afraid to kind of collaborate and take that important next step. And so I think it would be nice to sort of understand how you approach that from a more formal perspective, or did it just fall into your lap as an unfolding of this collaborative mindset? Because I find that it's few and far between. But how can we as an industry in Australia and beyond really treat this multidisciplinary approach of different professionals and also respect those each uniquely to their own for the benefit of obviously clients and people? So that would be interesting to see if you've had a process there or a mindset in the past that sort of you tackled and thought, hang on, like a personal trainer, they're not all like this. A physio, actually, we have complementary skill sets, right? So yeah, what was your sort of overcoming, if you like, of maybe that mindset?
Look, it's a great question. And I think, especially when we're all young, at least for myself, I know that ego plays a little bit of a role and thinking that I can do everything. And as I get older, I realize the less I know and the more that I need to lean on other people to help me achieve something. So I'm less afraid of collaboration if it's in the best direction of the client and helping them move forwards. The other thing too is I think being aware that not every relationship is going to work out too. There's this whole season, reason, lifetime. And clients, when they do rehab, it might only be a 12-week process. It could be a 16. I've got clients that are with me for 5 years. Things that work out well, things that don't. And I think it's making sure, if I don't have the answers, then I'd rather they go find them from somebody else. If I can't help them, then I really want them to move on to find the support that they need. But I guess in terms of the cross collaboration, staying in contact is super important. So, if it's a client that's come from a surgeon's office, having that direct contact, usually through email or fax. But, if it's like a trainer in our gym or the dietitian, we see each other face to face and we can have those those quick interactions to just make sure we're all on the same page and voice our concerns so we can move together in the right direction for the client. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that their best interests are put first.
Yeah, it's well said. Yeah, because sometimes we can be stuck in our own first-person perspective, but it's really good to step outside of that and acknowledge for the benefit of, let's say, that client, because it's a journey for them as much as it is for you being the EP or the trainer. And it's an interesting one because you point out numerous times that that journey could be a few weeks, could be a few months, it could be a number of years. And irrespective, there comes a time when, you'll need to lean on your network, which is your net worth. And I think that's a really key point you're making here, Dane, is that these quick interactions are really part of that process of unearthing maybe pain points or potential decisions that you're stuck on with a client, for example, and then being able to kind of go trust that process to say, hey, I'm happy for you to help me with this client. Here's how we can work together for the benefit of that client. I think it's beautiful, and it can be done in a real small ecosystem. It could also be done on a larger scale, which I'd like to dig in more because we've had Sam and Dr. Simon on once, Sam twice. And I really love using the example of Total Fusion. So that as a bigger ecosystem, how does that success play out for you in the interdisciplinary approach with physios and trainers and even functional or integrative doctors, let's say?
Yeah, great question. And I think first and foremost for me, I'm really aware of how it takes a community to help a client achieve their goal. So for example, we've got an athlete here who's climbing Everest summiting Everest in 2 months' time. And he's been using a fair few different services via allied health and also personal training to achieve his goals and make sure he gets ready. And what's really good about it too is we all have slightly different approaches again. So if there's something that I've been thinking that sits in my bubble, in my world, and then, I might talk to the dietitian or the physio, and then it's like, oh, actually, that's completely left field. That's a great idea. Let's do that. And it's when you can combine those things together that we start to have a really effective approach. And we've seen that for him. He's made some incredible changes to not only the way he moves, but to his diet, to his sleep. We do a lot of mindset training too, which I'm really massive on. And the capacity to have all of that under one roof makes it super simple. You don't have to outsource. And, if you do need to duck next door and just have that chat, you can.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, there's an old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think you pointed out that community aspect and that interdisciplinary approach of bringing in all of these professionals. I mean, at a high performance level, it's necessary. You have a massive team, or if a movie's being made, I mean, you look at the list of hundreds and hundreds of people who helped make that movie, and it's not just the actors, right? The actor is front of, but there's so much that happens behind the scenes. And I just love this. It gives me tingles. I really feel that conversations like this and putting knowledge out there that really allows us to really put forward an approach that is really multi-perspectives coming together is really needed. And part of those mindset shifts that you alluded to earlier, do you feel that knowledge and having a growth mindset has been essential for you throughout your journey to really peel away those egoic layers, because obviously there's stages of development, spiritually, physically, I believe, and across different domains. How important has that been for you to sort of grow in different levels and stages of your development?
Love that question. Super important. I'm really big on learning from other people that have already walked the journey. And one of those voices was Jim Rohn, who talks about spending more time on yourself than you do on your business or whatever it might be, family, etc. Because the only way for you to really grow and increase your value to society and serve people better is to look inward and work on yourself along the journey. And if I reflect back on me as a younger practitioner, probably pretty hot-headed, might jump to the extremes and things like that. I'm maybe a little bit more simmered down, cooler, maybe slightly, but super important. Self-development, I think, is just massive. And for me, I've stole or nicked this model from Exos in the States, and it's been so influential in how I treat with my patients. Their model is movement, mindset, nutrition, and recovery. And I kind of underline that with spiritual or soul level. And that kind of aligns with your purpose and your self-growth along the way too.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the philosophy. I really do. And it's interesting because self-development has sometimes caught the attention in a negative way. Yet I feel that irrespective of that, there is going to be different spectrums of knowledge that will speak to you as an individual, open your eyes wider. But I feel like there's this sort of self to other, when we say self-development, it becomes an other development. And it's interesting because you have this kind of cross-pollination. So I think some people might perceive it as being selfish, but it's not. It's self to other. because I feel my motto is, we need to love ourselves first before we can love another person, our neighbor. So it's an important, let's call it an epoch, or, a really ultra mindset shift. This is beautiful. I didn't realize it was going to go this way, Dane, but it's important to really understand this, the psychology, the motives, the purpose behind what we do as, call it, movement professionals. And, you and I have been on this journey for many years in separate ways, yet we come together, and there's so many sort of similarities. And it's good for the listeners to really engage in a type of dialogue that is philosophical, edifying, and really expand the mind. Now, let's zoom in, however, on really your approach as a high performance coach, you put it, right? What would be your structured approach, if you like, and whether it's structured and fluid, which makes what you do unique, but not out of reach maybe for others to think about an approach that could be similar or actually adopt a thing or two from what you do? That would be really great if we could knuckle in on that.
Yeah, totally. I think the first and foremost thing that just really comes to mind is the level of care that we have for our clients. And I think that that's super paramount. I consider myself so lucky that people trust me with their bodies to help them overcome whatever hurdles they're facing or achieve whatever goals that they want to do. So knowing that that's a blessing and something that I get to enjoy doing each and every day drives me to be better and do better. You're on the bandwagon, you fall off the bandwagon, but coming back to that really key purpose of why you do what you do is super important for me. When it comes to dealing with the client, firstly, it's looking at what their goals are. So if they're climbing Everest, then, we're a little bit more performance spectrum based. If they're coming back from an ACL surgery, if they're just a weekend warrior that wants to keep up with the kids, knowing what that looks like then forms the basis of our assessment. So always bringing things back to the client's goals and what they want to achieve. Part of that too is it's a little bit of sprinkling of what they know and what I know they need on top of it. So as a coach, you see a bunch of things and you see the low-hanging fruit. For example, a lot of people can't see how stressed they are, but if you read it on their face, if you take the time to listen to them, or when they approach and you just have this sense of aura and you're like, all right, well, we need to work on it. They might not be into doing a little bit of breath work and a little bit of mindset training, but I know that I need to sprinkle some of that into their program. So once we've identified what their goals are, I like to tie together objective and subjective measures. So subjective is, from their mouth, what's been going on, a history of injuries, if there's anything going on, get a background on sleep and nutrition, and tie that together with some objective assessments. So we might find that, say, we've got some scans that we can lean on for structural damage, but just because there's structural damage, it doesn't mean that they might have symptoms. So we tie that with a movement screen, and that might look like, generally speaking, we start with mobility. So I'll pop them onto the massage table. We might take a look at their hips, their spine, their shoulder, whatever's relevant. And on that note too, a really important part of my role and what I see exercise physiology, but also a really good practitioner takes that bird's eye view. If you zone in on the one symptom that they've got, it's a good chance that you're missing part or the whole piece of the puzzle. So looking at them almost from a head to toe aspect to see what's going on, and then we can start to identify the weaknesses and what might be holding them back from achieving their next level in performance or rehab. From the mobility section, then we take them into a strength test. And, if it's a ACL, we might be looking at their hamstring strength, their quad strength in isolation, and then also maybe in a functional test, like a single leg squat, if it's appropriate for the time. And we start to get a snapshot of where that client is. A lot of that too, for me, ties back to what we can call the coach's eye. So, when you've just had that experience and you've seen a lot of bodies and you've seen how they move, you start to then see where that low hanging fruit is when they do a certain movement. And that's what I love about being on the gym floor. That's where I spend most of my time. There's a little bit in the treatment rooms, but it's really in the gym, getting people strong, teaching them how to move well, because it's something that we take for granted. We might do a deadlift, we might do a split squat, but the tiny little cues, the nuanced cues that engage the glutes better or the core better so that the movement just starts to look really powerful. And when it looks and feels powerful, you can safely lift more load. And most people in a general gym setting, I could go around and I could pop a few balloons basically with some poor form that I'd love to go and correct. So all of that kind of ties back to exercise physiology being about that really moving well.
Yeah, brilliant. Loving it. Definitely aligns with our philosophies at FTI. In particular, we've done a lot of collaborative work with rehab trainer, sports physios in our movement restoration coach, and that talk, see, do model. And the talk is important to really look at the two spectrums there, the feedback, which is the client's perspective, and that's subjective, and really tuning in your listening. And it seems that you've really honed in on brilliant listening, Dane. Once you've been able to listen for those verbal, non-verbal cues, as you alluded to.
I don't know if my partner would say I'm always the best listener, but
well, I'm gauging here, I'm not going to go outside of the professional yet. And then the feed forward, which is your objective coach's feedback. So that talk element is really important. So I'm just sort of recapping this for the listeners to really get what you've said, which is so important here. Then it's the C, the observations in the back of that. And what you said subtly, I think, is it's these tests, call them. We don't want them to come across as tests, but they're specific. They're specificity behind the testing that they will do based on the talk, which is beautiful. And then from those observations, then it's the do element, which is what sort of programs are we going to provide, or the exercise that will frame up their programming. And then that's specific to their ultimate outcome. And I feel that even me, if I wind back years back, it was the superficiality of the goals, right? It wasn't really digging into a meta-analysis of actually what is it that they really want to achieve. And one of the examples that I've shared probably numerous times, the audience might think, here he goes again, is one of my clients a few years back in Primal Energy Fitness. So we're talking 10 years now, 10 years. And her ultimate outcome was, at the time I didn't know, was to climb Machu Picchu. So her confidence was down and she couldn't even do 200 meters on an erg, right? On a ski erg. We quickly just worked on her weaknesses physically and her mindset. And then after, was it 9 months of training with me and my business partner? So again, it was a collaborative effort. She sent us a postcard of her triumphant, in Machu Picchu. And I swear to you, I shed a tear and I thought, man, this is why I do what I do. And it's an interesting process at the time. I didn't fully map it out at that time. That was sort of the process that I thought, this is what we need to do, is really go deeper in unearthing what is it the ultimate outcome. So I really love what you've shared there.
Can I just tap onto that as well? I think it's a really important point. A lot of people just want to be heard. They want someone to take the time to listen to them. And you get that experience with rehab a lot. And especially, I was lucky enough to work in an oncology or cancer program, which is very unique and very nuanced relationships that you build with these people. And in a healthcare system where, people get used to maybe having 15 minutes max to express themselves, and that's not having a go at anybody. It's like, sometimes that's just how it is, right? But when you take the time to actually listen to what they're telling you, not only do you win their respect and they feel heard, but you better understand what they actually want. And then you can actually get to their goals, not what you kind of want to give them, but you can align those paths.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. I remember when I had my ACL surgery, and the surgeon was brilliant. Like he wasn't a cold kind of like process, where, as you pointed out, it's important to understand that there's a system and they get overloaded, right? Or they might load themselves up with too many operations or whatever it could be, maybe a combination of both. So there's a quick churn and burn, and hence the maybe dialogue or conversation or connection piece might not be there. But what was profound for me, and I always share this as well in different contexts, is he came by my bedside when I woke up from the anesthesia. I thought, this is powerful. He just lay a hand and said, "Are you okay, Tarek?" And I thought, man, yeah, I'm doing great. My mum and dad were there, and he was just beautiful that he made that effort. And I had a couple of other procedures done, and that wasn't the case. So I think sometimes, really being mindful of how busy we can get, even tired, as whether we're personal trainers or doctors or whatever perspective it is, it's really to treat that patient holistically and offer that piece of connection. You said it earlier, it's that quick interaction, and that quick interaction with clients at the end of a session, I found myself to be really powerful, because it could really finish the session on a beautiful high, or it could also then bring forward something for them that they might have needed. So whether it's more advice on something, or so I'm sure you're in that sort of frame of mind, and it does help, doesn't it, to really sort of take that little bit of time out if you can, and have that quick interaction. So really important, I think, for the listeners.
100%. And, people in this funny old world that we live in, with social media being what it is, and it's a double-edged sword, right? It's got some great stuff, but it's also bred a culture of, I think, a lot of coaches that don't actually train clients, and they don't know bodies. They haven't experienced bodies. That's the biggest thing that's allowed me to excel at what I do, is I've been lucky enough to work with a wide variety so that I can learn to then be the best that I can possibly be at my craft. And, when you take that time to listen to what they are saying to you, that's the best referral for a business that you can ever have. Because whether you're a personal trainer, an exercise physiologist, a physiotherapist, a massage therapist, if you develop that special bond, they're going to follow you wherever you go. They end up coming in the door for your services, not for the other trainer services, not for the other physios, and that's more powerful than anything, is building those special, unique relationships.
Yeah, those unique bonds. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those bonds that tie together can produce magic. And also, as you said, key thing is the referral, and trust becomes, you as the expert and as a friend. And then that sort of relationship becomes beneficial. Obviously, there's potential crossing the lines. But if you get into that rhythm and into that moment with them, I think nothing gets blurred, in my opinion. And it does take really awareness of our own journey to know our limitations ourselves first. So really powerful stuff here. One other aspect that I did want to go into is maybe a little bit deeper into the rehabilitation. So how do you deal with clients needing rehabilitation? So, they've had their operation, they've worked with a physio, and then maybe there's an end stage rehab. You talked a little bit about that earlier. So what are some of your protocols that you use for like end stage rehab, maybe where you come and intervene and then take that patient as a client now onto the next stage of their journey?
So in that acute phase, you'll find generally that the physio is the main point of call. They might need some hands-on treatment. They also, if it's diagnosis, then that's obviously physio realm and physio specialty. And then in that chronic phase to return to sport phase is where we kind of would take over more time with them. And really my job is just to try to seamlessly take over from where they've been with the physio, and then just gradually, baby steps, build them back towards their goal. And it comes back to, if it's a particular sport, we need to do a bit of a needs analysis. So what do they require in that sport? Is it a change of direction where we need to make sure there's a lot of field running with cutting and high intensity speed? Is it, maybe it's rowing, which is then a completely different ballpark and probably a different injury if it's rowing. So the needs analysis of what their goal is or their sport is, and then how do we marry those two realms together?
Yeah, and one of the big things, for me, and I've had a few injuries over the years, is also building back confidence. What are some of the processes that you, especially if they need to compete again in whichever sport it can be, are there any strategies that you use to help the clients build back that confidence in tantamount to the programming that you provide?
Really great question. The exercise program initially becomes a confidence builder. Say when you come out of surgery, you generally feel pretty crap about yourself. You might have been on crutches for a period of time. You might be taking, heavy dose medication. So, there's definitely some mindset stuff you can do early on in the process, but really focusing on what you can do is a big game changer. So, there's that list of 50 don'ts, but I like to focus on what are the 10 things you can do. And as soon as you start to focus the mind on what you can do and what you can control, you realize there's so much to work on in a positive way. So you've switched that glass half empty to glass half full. And from there, it's just a matter of building. Each time a client comes in for a review session, I've had some great sessions this morning where I might not have seen them for a couple of months, especially over the holiday break. And they come in and I'm like, mate, you are just hinging the best I've ever seen. Some people when they come in and they don't know the difference between squat and a hinge, and they round their spine too much and it's just a little bit of a disaster. And then when they come back and they've done their training, their practice, and that is such a confidence builder when you're nailing the exercises themselves. And then to me, you have to earn the right to move on. So we're not going to the next variation of deadlift or split squat or whatever it is until you've gotten this to the 99th percentile. So I think for my clients, they know that when they're getting updates, they're making progress themselves and they feel good in their body. In terms of tackling the mindset and the confidence, it's really important. We might clear them to go back to sport physically, but if they're not ready emotionally and mentally, then it's a different ballpark. And I was doing a wonderful course down the Gold Coast recently, and one of the athletes was a surfing athlete, and you can imagine the things go around with return sport with surfing. It's can be pretty hectic in terms of big waves, the anxiety that comes around with that. You've got other elements like sharks and things too. So depending on somebody's experience, just because we're physically like, mate, you're good, get back on there, it doesn't mean that they're okay upstairs. So again, listening to the client client, having that communication, checking in with them. With my climber, we've gone down the rabbit hole of what are your fears? When you get up there, what's the thought process that's going through your mind? And then we work on tackling it. And one of the best ways for us to do that is to enhance their capacity to deal with stress or when things go wrong. And that's where, great things like hot and cold exist. So how long can you sit in the cold bath for? We do cryotherapy, a lot of sessions here. We're lucky enough to have that facility and we just keep pushing it up. Breath hold work, having these tools where he can safely get into stress and we can make sure that he's got the tools to get himself out of it. And following the breath is a really big one. So most of the time when people get stressed out, the first thing they do is they start to have these really shallow breaths followed by, a bit of a panic attack. They might have some anxious thoughts coming up. So getting them to be aware of their state would be such an important first thing. So we teach them the breathing mechanics and how to breathe well. And it's really funny when you go further down that topic, how poorly a lot of us do breathe, especially in a very stressful world with all these heightened sensitivities and, I talked about social media before. Stimulus just keeps getting, attention spans keep dropping. We're all very wired. So the breath work, super important. And acknowledging the feelings and emotions that come up in that process and how can we rephrase them to find a more confident individual.
Beautifully said, yeah. And part of that reframing, as you said earlier, is that positivity, which, is reframing, as you put it, the 10 good things that we can focus on without sort of alluding to the negative is so important on many, many levels. And yet from a performance perspective, it's magic. And also the encouragement, the dosage of encouragement along the way. So treat it as a journey, give them a compliment when they've, accomplished a deadlift with precision or a squat, because it's a confidence booster and it's a real measure. So really, really getting into that domain where that becomes a regular thing, I think so important. As much as that feedback, the conversations that we alluded to earlier, there's so many good things that have come out of this conversation that I feel that even myself, I need to be aware of at times. It's always good to be reminded and to be able to share that with the listeners to take some of these strategies, guys and girls and everyone in between, to really be able to make a change and a difference on the spot. And it becomes habitual. And I think that's important, is that we need to sort of rewire our habits because, again, we get busy, like you said, distractions on the phone. The first thing I do, for example, again, I don't touch my phone. Well, I do only for my apps for my breath work and other things. But apart from that, I don't go and check emails because, again, notifications, if we can maybe dull some of those push notifications, that will lessen the load, the anxious load, all of a sudden the mind goes into work or it goes into emergency. Then when we can dive certainly a lot deeper into those things, yet I think a lot of us are aware, yet we may just dismiss it or avoid it because it's inconvenient. So, get comfortable with that uncomfortable, guys, and have that quick conversation. Don't just rush your clients or your patients out. Spend a minute, 2 minutes. It's magic. Is there anything else as we close, coming to closing, that you'd like to share from our conversation or give a bit of advice to the listeners?
I think something that I find super beneficial and just helps me grow as a practitioner and maybe the audience as well is just always trying to be at the top of your craft. It's more about being a better individual than trying to compete with other people. But upskilling is so important. Getting out there, doing courses, exploring different realms so that you understand. And the thing with the human body is we have this really strange concept where we separate it into, the cardiovascular and the musculoskeletal and then the digestive. But when we really understand that everything works in unison. So if something's out one area, there's a good chance it's going to have a knock-on effect. For example, knowing that most of your serotonin gets created in your gut, right? So if you're eating terribly or if you're not digesting properly, then you're going to have changes in your mood. And then that might be why they're partially sporadic. If you're not eating well, then it's going to have a knock-on effect to your performance when you move. Likewise, if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to have enough energy to exert in the session. You're going to make poorer choices when you go to the supermarket. So I think always being a student of the craft and just, even if it's not your lane, knowing for yourself and then knowing to be like, you know what, it might be this, maybe check out this person, right? I know this guy, he really helped me, or here's this clip on YouTube, have a listen to Andrew Huberman talk about whatever, and let them sort of go down their own rabbit hole of knowledge. So I just think upskilling is super important, especially when we leave our certificates, when we leave university, just not getting stuck here. You know, if I go back to where I was, if I stayed there, I wouldn't have got to where I am today. So surrounding yourself with smarter people than you and learning from the wisdom that exists around, and that will just really have this amazing knock-on effect to you and your clients.
Beautiful. That's lovely. The interconnectivity is so powerful, and being really open-minded and really being a sponge in a specific way for knowledge. And you're right, because even though it might not be in your lane or wheelhouse, it's really good to actually understand it, even if it's a crash course or yeah, that's really lovely. And sometimes, you know, a professional might start as a trainer, a personal trainer, and then they can evolve their career. And I've known of people who become doctors from becoming a trainer. So, you know, it's not to say that if you have that little bit of knowledge, it's dangerous necessarily. Of course, if you understand that it's within your wheelhouse and that you have that network where you can lean on or distribute knowledge and share knowledge is really powerful. That's well said. Now, how can people follow you, or have you got a social media presence yourself where people can reach out to you, Dane?
Yeah, I do have an Instagram. Dane Larsen Exercise Physiology is me on Instagram. I've got a YouTube as well, just my name too, and a website, but probably most of the stuff just happens on Instagram. So if anybody has any questions or further thoughts they want to share, then obviously please hit me up. I'm happy to help where I can.
Wonderful. Yeah, it'll be in the show notes too for those listening in. Dane, really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your sharings. It's been very profound, and I've loved our conversation.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. It was a nice way to spend a Friday afternoon.
If you enjoyed this episode, could you do me a quick favor? If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, could you please add your 5-star rating? Doing this really does support the show and gets our episodes in front of listeners just like yourself. Thanks for your support. I greatly appreciate it.